Jim Jordan's speaker quest ends. Welcome to Columbus on the Record. It looks like Congressman Jim Jordan will fail in his bid to become Speaker of the U.S. House. On Friday morning, Jordan again failed to get the number of Republican votes he needed to become Speaker. It was his third attempt. In each try, more Republicans voted against him. Friday afternoon, the Republican caucus members voted to find another candidate for Speaker. Mark Weaver, you often say that there are disagreements within parties, and that happens in both parties. But does this go a little deeper than that?
It's starting to look that way. You know, the party was a centralized effort 50 years ago where the party bosses could tell you what to do. And now every candidate runs for himself or herself. And they're all looking at their own political futures. And when you put a bunch of them in a room, it's hard to get them all in the same direction. At some point, though, for the good of the country, more important than the good of the party, they have to pull together. It took a bunch of votes for Kevin McCarthy to become Speaker, although they were one after the other. It looks like it's going to take a bunch more to get a Republican Speaker.
Desiree Tims, were Democrats secretly hoping that Jim Jordan would become Speaker from a political standpoint?
I don't know if Democrats were hoping for that because we've already lived under Donald J. Trump as president, and we've seen every Republican in Congress acquiesce to Trump's wills and sort of skew right. I think it was eye-opening, though, for the future of the 2024 election cycle because Jim Jordan embodies the Trump agenda. And so what does it mean for the Republican Party for them to continue to vote against Jim Jordan? And so I think what Democrats are looking for is a solution to continue to do the House's business, but I don't know what the Republican Party is going to do because this is squarely in their camp. They have the majority and they have to figure out how they want to govern.
Jesse, all 10 Republican members from Ohio, members of Congress, voted with Jim Jordan. I guess not surprising. He's the home state person, but not all of them are as closely aligned to Jim Jordan as some others are.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting. There was a period of time where Representative Dave Joyce was considering kind of a different path forward, maybe empowering the, a temporary Speaker pro tem situation. And so, but I mean, at the end of the day, they were where the majority of Republicans in the caucus were on this particular issue. This is just messy, and it's kind of impeding the ability of the chamber to move forward on basic.
89%, Mark, of Republicans still wanted Jim Jordan, at least in the vote from today. He got 25 votes against him, but he had close to 200 votes for him. Shouldn't he be the Speaker of the Republicans if 89% of the caucus wants him to be Speaker?
Jim Jordan is very popular with the base. In addition to having been a conservative his whole career, running the Judiciary Committee and this other committee doing oversight, he is prepared. He doesn't read what his staffers tell him to do. He asks questions that shows he knows the material. Here's the problem. This is less about ideology than it is when you're in the House of Representatives. There's 435 student body presidents, all of whom think they're the smartest, and all of them are doing things for their own political reasons. And when the majority is this small, anything can happen.
Desiree, is there any chance that Democrats, apparently the weekend and Monday they'll have another vote, Republicans will, is there any chance Democrats will try to form a coalition with some Republicans to get a compromise Speaker, like they did here in Ohio?
I don't know if Democrats are going to help Republicans figure out how to govern. I do know that Speaker Jeffries mentioned that they were open to some options for candidates to become Speaker of the House, options that include probably folks who aren't as extreme, and options that include certain deals for Democrats, including committee opportunities and other things that they may want, which under McCarthy, that was a no deal situation. So maybe the Republicans will rethink that as they try to find a new speaker.
Jesse, does this help hurt Jim Jordan back in his quasi-central Ohio district, stretches from Urbana, Lima, all the way into Westerville?
I mean, I don't think it hurts him. I think he's well known and well liked in that district. It's a district that he can win easily, but really any way you draw that district in that particular part of Ohio, a Republican's going to succeed there.
This Mark, this also sort of showed some strength. Granted, it was only 25, but it showed some strength of the more centrist, moderate Republicans, so-called. Is this a sense that they might be trying to get their footing back, that they have seen what's happened with the extreme, far extreme right, Matt Gaetz and Jim Jordan, and they try to put their stake in the ground here?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think the more important part of it is each member does what's in his or her own political interest. And if that means aligning with Jim Jordan, they're going to do it. And if it doesn't, they won't. We're coming up on the next congressional cycle. All of them are up, and all of them are looking at potential opponents who are going to be here in Ohio filing soon. Mm-hmm. So most of the decisions are made based on their own political interest. And with this narrow majority, we're seeing how tough it is to have a unity candidate.
Any chance Democrats put a candidate with resources, a known candidate, up against Jim Jordan this time?
I doubt it. I think every Democratic candidate who runs against Jordan, they raise an enormous amount of money, and they still have yet to cross that finish line against him because of the lines. The lines are drawn so gerrymandered in a way where Jim Jordan essentially doesn't have to do anything to win, and that's probably why he hasn't passed any bills ever in Congress. He doesn't have to work that hard.
Any chances of primary opponent?
They'd lose quickly. There's no doubt that Jordan's district is as winnable for Republicans as Joyce Beatty's district is for the Democrats. There's no way a Republican's going to take her out. They spend $1 million, they'll still lose. What's interesting is I wonder if Jim Jordan wishes he had jumped into the U.S. Senate race, because he might have cleared that field. He might have been able to win that nomination. In the back of the head, as he thought he's going to be Speaker one day, it looks like he won't. Makes you wonder whether he wishes he had jumped into the Senate race.
He still could. December 20th is the deadline, right?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, but there's a whole lot of ground to gain.
Yeah.
And these other three candidates, I know we're going to talk about it here shortly, have taken up a lot of that ground.
All right, we'll get to that in a moment. First, our second topic, a new poll shows steady support for abortion rights in Ohio. The Baldwin Wallace University poll of voters shows 58% support issue 1, which would enshrine abortion rights in the Constitution. 34% oppose the proposed amendment. 8% remain undecided. The poll matches a poll done this summer. So far, the intensity of the campaign has not lived up to expectations. Fundraising seems to be on the slow side. The yes on issue 1 side is charging for yard signs as a way to make money. The no on issue 1 side only recently launched a limited TV ad campaign. First to the poll. The Baldwin Wallace methodology, Jesse, is kind of questioned once in a while, but it shows it's nearly identical to the USA Today Ohio Bureau poll done in, I think, July or August.
Yeah, I think when you poll on this issue, the majority of people are going to support some access to abortion in the state of Ohio, certainly more access than we had under the 2019 law, which banned most abortions in the state. The question is whether this particular issue goes too far for individuals, and that's obviously something that no campaign is trying to push back on. Another thing I thought was interesting is both the Suffolk poll and Baldwin Wallace poll pulled on the actual constitutional language versus what the ballot language is going to be. And so I don't know how much that affects things, but the ballot language is more favorable to the no side.
39% of Republicans support issue 1, according to this poll. Only 7% of Democrats oppose it. So the parties are lining up more on the yes side than the no side, Mark.
Yes, although independents were much closer. I thought that was an interesting crosstab in the poll. I like the way Jessie said it, because I think she's right when she said that Ohioans favor some access to abortion, and the argument is about how much that is. And unless the no side can get it out there that this is much more than an abortion amendment. In fact, it says included but not limited to abortion, and that is a Lake Erie-sized loophole that some judge, who we don't know who it is in the future, might find all sorts of other things in there that could trouble people. Unless that message gets out, it very well may pass.
37% of those who call themselves evangelical, Desiree, support issue 1. Many of the ads, at least the last couple of ads for the yes on 1 side, have featured faith. One features a pastor from Columbus, and the latest one features a man from Bexley who says he grew up religious and opposed to abortion, but now he's changed. Is that strategy working in that it's not quite as clear-cut among evangelicals, whatever that term means?
I think the yes side is definitely having conversations with people of faith. I'm a person of faith. I understand some of the moral arguments on both sides and what that means in terms of religion. I think at the heart of it is, what is issue one and what will that mean for Ohioans, right? And so we're telling people stories about Beth and Kyle, who had a wanted pregnancy. Everyone read the international story now about the 10-year-old girl. What really happened is people across Ohio understood what abortion care access means for Ohioans, and that includes miscarriage care. It includes when a fetus has abnormalities and different healthcare options are necessary, and they don't want their doctors conferring with politicians. And those stories humanize what's happening in these hospital rooms. And that includes pastors and people of faith who have to sit and pray with these very same families.
Jesse, why hasn't this campaign, it's not the same buzz as we heard this summer. It was a different issue, different, dynamic, but we all thought there'd be a lot of national money coming in. We thought that it's national media coming in, but there's no real national money coming in. Why is that?
Well, I guess I'd push back a little bit. There is national fundraising on both sides of these campaigns. Like, for example, Susan B. Anthony Foundation on the no side is giving money. Planned Parenthood on the yes side is giving money. So there is national interest on this in Ohio. I think you're going to see a lot more money, a lot more ads before we hit November 7th, but millions have been spent already, and I anticipate that will only grow.
Do you see the same? Market's been saying that because the abortion rights opponents have sort of been on a losing streak with these states, I think 8 states prior to this, abortion rights folks have come out on top, that Ohio is going to be the firewall. This is where we have to make a stand and try to win one. Will that happen now? Will they try to make that stand in the last 3 weeks?
They'll try to. Every one of these state issues has been slightly different. And of course, the states are different. Both sides are spending a lot of money, but there's a profit motive built in. The abortion industry makes a lot of money off the intentional killing of innocent human life. And so they need to protect those profits the same way the tobacco industry wanted to protect its profits. And so a lot of money will be spent under the surface that's not reportable on turnout and getting people to the polls that won't show up in media buys. The polling suggests a troubling trend for the no side, but there's still several days left.
Is the folks excited about this issue one as they were about the issue one in August, Desiree? On the Democratic side, the left side?
I believe so. I think the polling reflects that, and that most Ohioans support issue one. Our goal right now is to make sure that everyone who wants to support issue one is out there voting in November and voting early to make sure that they have access to abortion care in the state. I think the energy is there. The young people want it. Evangelicals want it. All sorts of people. It cuts across different demographics who support issue one. The question is, how do we make sure everyone goes out and vote this November?
Do we have any indication from early voting, Jesse, that there are any surprises? Generally, Democrats vote early more frequently in greater numbers than Republicans. Is that holding true?
I did a brief look at early voting numbers. I mean, the largest counties have the largest number, but they also have the largest number of voters, so that's what you would expect. But yes, certainly this issue is Democrats support abortion access at a higher rate than Republicans, but the polling indicates that a portion of Republicans would support this issue as well.
Okay. If the campaign for and against issue one lacks intensity, then the fight over legal marijuana is downright mellow. Unlike the legalization campaign of 2015, there have been no TV commercials, no rallies, no green-headed muscular mascots named Buddy. That Baldwin Wallace poll shows support for legalizing recreational marijuana is at about 57%. 35% of those surveyed say they oppose the law, and 8% are undecided. Desiree, this has been a very quiet campaign. Why do you think that is?
Well, money talks. And so I think it's all about how much money a different campaign will have in order to get the word out. I think what everyone is counting on is folks paying attention to what's happening. We certainly know the legalization of marijuana is popular both among Ohioans and frankly across the country. And we've heard many stories about Ohio catching up to Michigan and other states that are earning tax revenue because of this and what that will mean for certain communities. And so through the layers of equitable programs and licensure, I think people are interested in it. Again, I think the question begins to unfold of whether people will come out and vote this November to support it. And I think they will once they get to the polling location.
Jesse, the 2015 campaign was kind of almost like a caricature. I mean, they literally had a mascot who was kind of a caricature. I'm not sure if it was taken seriously in 2015. There were other issues, and this one seems to be more, policy, tax money. Other states are doing it. There's no real gimmicks.
Yeah, it's wild how dramatically different it is, because I covered the campaign in 2015. I was there for the mascots and, the discussion about this is going to be a monopoly and give certain people access. I think you're in a situation where, number one, we've had a medical marijuana program for a little bit here in Ohio, so that's a little bit that way. And then I just think issue one and the abortion and reproductive rights discussion is taking up so much oxygen that there's just not a lot left for this issue two.
It comes down to turnout, Mark, and this is an odd year election. Usually turnout much less, 30% range if it's a good year. Young people are going to probably vote for this. That's what the polls show, but young people tend not to vote in odd year elections.
Yeah, the aforementioned money being spent to turn out yes voters on issue one will have the effect of helping issue two, kind of political tandem issues in some ways. What's interesting, though, is when I talk to law enforcement in my work as a magistrate and a part-time acting judge, nearly everyone who deals with addicted people think this is a really bad idea. This is not the marijuana of the 1970s. In my courtrooms over the years, I asked drug addicts almost always, I'd say, what was your first drug? And they always say marijuana. And I ask them if they wish they hadn't started, and they always, these opioid addicts and meth addicts, always say yes. I gave a speech in Seattle earlier this week, and I ran down to Chipotle to get some dinner, and I smelled pot for 4 blocks in Seattle. This passes, that will be Columbus. Everywhere you go, the Blue Jackets game, the Ohio Theater, Buckeye game, wafting of marijuana will be everywhere. Quality of life will be reduced. This is a really bad idea.
But it was when you smelled it, you just see like people, acting funny, or is it just you could smell it?
Oh no, the smelling was the annoying part. It's the court system and the law enforcement that will tell you that the toll, both of additional addicts and of children who will come upon edibles and ingest them, because edibles will become ubiquitous. They'll be everywhere. And the states that have done this are often now looking at whether they did the right thing. And if Ohio passes this, I think a lot of bad things will come of it.
Desiree, that is the concern. Workplace safety, a lot of organizations, the Chamber of Commerce, other places are worried about that. How do you respond to those?
I think the arguments that they're making are the same arguments we probably had when we were talking about alcohol. And if you consume too much of anything, it can be a problem. Look, the reality is by allowing marijuana to be legalized recreationally, it will definitely impact Black and brown children who are often entered into the criminal legal system because of a small amount of marijuana. They don't qualify for financial aid or housing, or they fail a drug test for a job because they smoked pot. So I see this as an opportunity to eliminate some of those issues from our society. And so there's a website just like alcohol.com. Everyone can go visit it to learn more about the facts about what this legislation will mean here in Ohio.
But to be clear, if you have a personal use of marijuana right now, the maximum punishment is a $150 fine. There is nobody in jail or prison because of personal holding of marijuana. There are dealers in jail, but the maximum you can have is a $150 fine, which is a parking ticket.
But that hasn't always been the case.
Oh, I'm only speaking about now, and that, I think it's where it ought to be now. You shouldn't go to prison for having a personal amount. But there is a myth out there that there's a lot of college students who are behind bars for years because they had a joint. That is Hollywood nonsense.
But there have been folks in the past, Desiree.
That's right, and there are people who are still in for some of these crimes, and the system is still, the criminal justice system moves very slowly, and so we're not just talking about college students, we're talking about young Black boys in high-risk communities where, these petty crimes often lead to greater consequences. And so for me, it is about how do we make sure we move them out of the criminal justice system so they have a fair chance at other opportunities that young white kids in the suburbs have.
Jesse, this is law, so state lawmakers could repeal it, but there's some suggestion they may tweak it if it does pass, especially if it passes by a decent margin.
Yeah, I would say if this passes by like a healthy margin, I would be surprised if it was repealed entirely, but you would definitely see there's members of the Senate. Senate President Matt Huffman has expressed an interest in looking at THC levels or, like diversion to children or so forth. So I think you could definitely see different pieces of legislation passed around this. and we'll see if that aligns with what Ohioans want on this vote.
First step, you got to vote yes or no on November 7th. Our last topic: under normal circumstances, the primary fight for U.S. Senate would be near top of mind for most politicos, but with two statewide issues on the ballot, Republican candidates Matt Dolan, Bernie Moreno, and Frank LaRose are scrambling for attention. That Baldwin Wallace poll shows each man lacks name ID. Frank LaRose's fundraising last quarter was lower than expected. Dolan and Moreno raised a little more money than LaRose did, but those two men are very wealthy, and they contributed millions of dollars to their campaign. Mark Weaver, how do you see this campaign? Now, the primary is not that far away, 5 months away, and none of these candidates has really separated themselves yet.
This is going to be a knockdown drag-out. Sherrod Brown will almost certainly lose next year. Republicans know it. He's never had a year like this where he either didn't have a good political win behind him, which was what '06 was, or a weak political candidate opposing to him, which was what 2012 and 2018 were. So Republicans know he's almost certainly going to lose, and they're all dying to be the next senator. So these three candidates will slug it out to see who will go on to defeat Sherrod Brown.
So what's separated? Is it Bernie Moreno, the Trump candidate, and will that put him over the top like it did J.D. Vance?
Yeah, I mean, Trump's going to have to come in a lot stronger for Moreno for it to make a difference. What's interesting is Moreno early on said he wouldn't spend his own money, which I thought was kind of shocking. He has since spent his own money, and so has Matt Dolan. Although Frank LaRose is the one that really has sort of the track record and a history of support both in a general election and a primary election, which is what the task is. So I know all three of these candidates, they're all good men. I think we may even see another candidate or two come in who wouldn't be a significant candidate, and that just take away a few percentage points here and there. This could come down to the wire.
Desiree, I take it you disagree that it's a given that Sherrod Brown will lose in November, next November.
Sherrod Brown is a force of nature, and I think he has proven that every single election. And when he's not running, right, I think people around the state know him. He has support in rural and urban communities. And in fact, although he's running against a group of Republicans that are very, very wealthy, he has still outraised them with grassroots dollars. And so I think this campaign is going to be very interesting. I don't know who's going to shake out on the Republican side. Frank LaRose has more name ID but no money. And the other two candidates are just making it rain out of their own personal bank accounts. But when it comes down to work being done and popularity and who people trust, that person is Sherrod Brown.
Jesse, what is the talk at the State House about Frank LaRose's, last quarter he raised like $750,000 in the last 3 months. But he's been doing other things. He supported the first issue one, which was the 60% threshold question. Now he's active in this campaign as well.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's surprised that Frank LaRose has less money than the other two candidates, and he certainly has less personal wealth than the other two candidates, so he cannot self-fund in the way that Moreno or Dolan can. LaRose, it'll be really interesting how much voters remember about the August issue one and how much they tie it to him. It seems like a bit of an unforced error, but we will see if that's an issue that people are voting on in March.
We hear rumors, Mark, that some big name folks might jump in. Vivek Ramaswamy, maybe. We talked about Jim Jordan. I mean, we still have over a month till the filing deadline. Is there any chance if none of these candidates really catches fire, raises a lot of money on aside from their own personal wealth, raises a lot of money, that somebody might sneak in at the last minute? I mean, somebody, a big name.
Yeah, the answer is yes, and Vivek is the most likely. Jim Jordan, if he doesn't become speaker, still controls two very powerful committees, which gets things done. So he doesn't have an incentive to run. Vivek does. He's got a national base. He's got a national reputation. He clearly has a future in the party. He's very well spoken, has a good ear for politics. I don't know that he'll jump in. I know that if he did jump in, he won't clear the field, but he will be a contender immediately.
Sherrod Brown in this poll is basically tied with all three of these candidates. That has to be worrisome for Democrats.
I think it's worrisome for 5 minutes, and then the other 55 minutes of that hour, I think voters are reflecting on the wins that Sherrod Brown has delivered over the years. He has relationships from labor all the way to, teachers and small business owners. And so I think once voters are hearing his record a little bit more and reminded of all the work that he has done and contributed to the state, those numbers are going to go up, as well with ads and mailers and everything else.
Does Joe Biden drag him down if his unpopularity rating is around 60% in this state right now?
I don't know if it drags him down. I think there's an opportunity every time there's a presidential candidate on the ballot because turnout is higher. And so I think for that benefits with Sherrod Brown. And the area where Sherrod is strong is that a lot of Republicans and independents like Sherrod Brown. He's not just a Democrat candidate, right? Republicans like him too.
Right, we've got to get to our off-the-record parting shots. Mark Weaver, you're up first.
If you consumed news this week that told you that 500 people died when an Israeli missile hit a hospital, your news was wrong. None of that was true. It wasn't an Israeli missile, it didn't hit a hospital, and the number 500 has never been proven. Truth is often the first casualty in war, and media are leaping to the Palestinian side and Hamas side quickly without good reason.
Desiree.
Well, my favorite organization, Innovation Ohio Education Fund, released a report last week entitled Ohio's Missing Voters, where we identified nearly 700,000 inactive but registered voters on the books. And so we are encouraging everyone to please vote and participate in this upcoming election.
Jesse.
I think the best festival in Ohio is the Circleville Pumpkin Show this weekend, so I will be participating in many pumpkin things.
They named the pumpkin this year that won. It had a name. I forget the name of the pumpkin.
I know it was a record-setting
Yes,
pumpkin.
and it had a name. Forgive me for not, we'll get it next week. We'll get the name of the pumpkin that won at the Circleville Pumpkin Festival. Anyway, Sherrod Brown this week came out in favor of Issue 1, the abortion rights amendment, but still no word on how he would vote on Issue 2, the marijuana legalization question. My guess is we may not hear that before Election Day. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Check us out online, continue the conversation on Facebook, and watch us anytime on your time at wosu.org/COTR or on the PBS video app. For our crew and our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.